If you think ghost stories end when the haunting does, you're wrong. People love to tell themselves that fear is simple, that it's just the pounding heart, the chill in the spine, the scream caught in the throat. But that's not the truth. Fear isn't only about what you see, it's about what happens after. It's about the silence that lingers when the door creaks open by itself. It's about the way your voice catches when you try to explain it to someone else and realize they're looking at you differently, like you've gone mad. That's the part we don't talk about enough. The reactions. I've listened to survivors laugh while recalling things no sane person should ever laugh about. I've seen men who faced horrors go stone silent, as if the words themselves had been stolen. I've heard people describe their terror in voices that shook with shame, as if admitting what they'd seen made them weak. And if you've ever encountered something unexplainable, you know the reactions are what stay with you, not just your own, but everyone else's. Because when the impossible stares back at you, what do? Do you scream? Do you run? Or do you freeze and try to convince yourself it never happened at all? That's why I want you to listen closely tonight. 17 ghost stories. 17 lives altered forever. Each one not only terrifying in what happened, but in how the people inside them responded. Some laughed. Some prayed. Some never spoke again. And one of them was me. I'll save that for the end. You'll understand why. But as you listen, remember this. Fear doesn't just live in haunted houses, graveyards, or abandoned roads. It lives in memory. It lives in the pauses of a sentence, in the tremble of a hand. Fear lives in the aftermath, the way people break, bend, or pretend nothing happened at all. So tonight isn't just about ghosts. It's about the marks they leave, the way they carve into our minds, twist our reactions, and linger long after the shadows have passed. And if you stay with me through every story, you'll hear the one that explains why I don't sleep well anymore. Why, even as I speak these words, I feel the weight of eyes I can't see. 17 stories, 17 warnings, and one confession I never planned to share. So lean in, listen carefully, because the real terror isn't in the haunting itself. It's in what you'll do after. I was traveling for work when I ended up at a hotel that felt wrong. Not falling apart wrong. On the surface, it was polished, respectable, even charming in an old-world kind of way. But the halls were too quiet. The wallpaper peeled in corners like skin, and the air smelled faintly of mildew and perfume, as if someone was trying to mask decay with sweetness. That night, I lay in bed listening to the hum of the old radiator. I'd almost drifted off when I heard it. Laughter. At first, it was soft, like someone chuckling to themselves in the next room. I thought nothing of it. Thin walls, maybe a guest enjoying a late-night show. But the laughter didn't stop. It grew sharper, louder, filling the silence until it seemed to seep through the walls themselves. It wasn't joyful laughter. It was unhinged, ragged, as if every laugh was being forced out of a throat that wanted to scream instead. I pressed my ear to the wall, and it was clear. The sound came from the room next to mine. The next morning, exhausted and uneasy, I mentioned it to the woman at the front desk. She blinked at me, confused. "That's not possible," she said. "That room's been locked for years." I asked why, but she just shook her head, muttering something about repairs before quickly changing the subject. That night, the laughter came again. Louder this time. Closer, like the woman was standing right behind the wall with her mouth pressed to it. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew she wasn't laughing at herself. She was laughing at me. I've always hated mirrors. They're supposed to reflect reality, but too often, they feel like a doorway, like something on the other side is just waiting for you to look too long. One night, a woman I knew was getting ready for bed when she felt it, that prickle on the back of the neck, the sense of being watched. She glanced into the bathroom mirror and froze. Behind her reflection, there was someone else. It wasn't her husband. He was out of town. It wasn't her child, fast asleep in the next room. This was a stranger, a tall, dark shape standing just at the edge of the frame where the light didn't quite reach. She spun around. The bathroom was empty. Nothing but tiled walls and the faint hum of the fan. But when she turned back to the mirror, the figure was still there. Closer this time. Her scream caught in her throat. She stumbled backward, heart hammering, but the reflection didn't mimic her fear. No, it smiled. That was the detail she couldn't shake afterward. Her own face was twisted in terror, but the figure behind her was calm, almost amused, lips curling in a grin that didn't belong. She slammed the door shut, refusing to look again. She slept on the couch that night, lights blazing. In the morning, she told herself it had to be stress, exhaustion, anything but what she really saw. But when she went back into the bathroom, the mirror had changed. In the corner, faint and smudged like condensation, there was the outline of a handprint pressed against the glass, on the inside. She covered that mirror with a sheet. Last I heard, it's still there, hidden, waiting. I used to drive the long distances at night for work. Empty highways, endless lines of trees, and a silence so deep it made the engine feel like the only sound in the world. One night, I saw a figure by the roadside. A man, standing alone under a flickering streetlight, his thumb out. Against my better judgment, I pulled over. He climbed in without a word, settling into the back seat. I asked where he was headed. Nothing. Just silence. The air grew colder, heavy, like the windows had been rolled down even though they were sealed shut. I tried again, forcing a laugh. Rough night, huh? Still nothing. Not even the sound of breathing. I kept driving, telling myself I was overthinking it. But when I glanced at the rearview mirror, something made my stomach drop. The man wasn't there. Not exactly. The seat was occupied. Shadows bending in ways that didn't make sense, but the reflection showed nothing. The mirror was empty. My hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles white. I didn't dare stop. I didn't dare look back. Then came the sound. A slow drag of a hand across glass. I turned my head just enough to see faint smears forming on the inside of the back windows. Fingerprints. 5 long streaks sliding down as if someone unseen was pressing against the glass from within. I floored it. Miles blurred under the headlights until finally I pulled over at a gas station. When I looked again, the back seat was empty. The fingerprints were gone. I never picked up another hitchhiker. But sometimes when I'm driving late at night, I still hear it. The sound of a hand brushing across the glass. Children cry out in the night for all sorts of reasons. Nightmares, thirst, shadows in the corner. But sometimes the cries don't come from where you think they do. A couple once told me about a night that changed how they looked at their daughter forever. She was 6 years old, a sweet, timid child who always needed the nightlight on. Around midnight, they heard her whispering. Not crying, not calling, whispering. Soft, urgent words they couldn't make out. The mother got up first, padding down the hallway, expecting to find her daughter sitting up in bed with her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. But when she opened the door, her stomach dropped. The bed was neatly made. Her daughter was lying there, sound asleep, breathing slow and steady. The whispering hadn't stopped. It was coming from beneath the bed. Heart pounding, she crouched down and peered into the darkness. 2 wide eyes stared back at her. Her daughter's eyes, pale, frightened, shining in the glow of the nightlight. The girl under the bed whispered, "Mommy, there's someone in my bed." The mother screamed. Her husband rushed in, but by the time he knelt to look, the space was empty. No second daughter, just dust and shadows under the frame. The girl on the mattress stirred at the noise, rubbing her eyes, asking what was wrong. They didn't tell her. They couldn't, but from that night on, they never left her alone in the dark. And they never shook the feeling that maybe, just maybe, something else had tried to take her place. And if you're wondering who was really in the bed that night, the parents still don't know. Hospitals are supposed to be safe. Bright lights, steady routines, staff always moving from room to room. But anyone who's worked the night shift knows they can be the eeriest places on earth. A nurse I spoke to swore she'd never forget what happened one quiet evening. Most of the patients were asleep, monitors beeping softly in the background. She was doing her rounds when she reached a room where the privacy curtain was drawn. She assumed the patient was resting. But then she noticed the curtain was swaying. Not lightly, the way air conditioning makes it ripple. No, this was a steady movement like someone pacing behind it. She called out the patient's name. No answer. She stepped closer, heart thudding, and pulled the curtain back. The bed was empty, perfectly made. No patient, no visitor. Still, the curtain kept moving, brushing against her hand as though someone invisible had just passed by. Shaken, she checked the chart again. The patient assigned to that room had died earlier that day. The body had already been taken away. She told herself it was exhaustion, stress, a trick of the light. But later, when she walked past the same room, she saw it again. The curtain drawn shut, swaying gently, though the room was locked and unoccupied. Other nurses admitted they'd seen it too. Some said they heard murmurs from behind the fabric, as though a conversation were happening just out of sight. The hospital staff doesn't talk about it openly, but they all know which room it is, and they all avoid walking too close when the curtain stirs on its own. Because sometimes it isn't just privacy the curtain is keeping. Paranormal investigators live for evidence. Footsteps, shadows, temperature drops. But the thing they crave most is a voice, a whisper from the other side. One investigator I knew used to record every session, hours of static and silence, just hoping for something. One night he finally got it. He was alone in an abandoned farmhouse, sitting cross-legged on the dusty floor with his recorder running. He asked the usual questions. Is anyone here? Do you want to say something? Nothing but quiet creaks in response. When he played the tape back later, his blood ran cold. At first, it was just static. Then, under his own voice, another one whispered. The words were faint, but clear. I'm right behind you. He remembered the moment exactly. He had been sitting still, the room empty, the door shut. There was no one else there. He tried to laugh it off, telling himself maybe it was interference, a glitch. But when he rewound the tape and listened again, the whisper changed. This time it didn't say, I'm right behind you. It said his name. That broke him. He deleted the file, erased the session entirely. But he told me something I'll never forget. Even after the file was gone, he swore the whisper followed him. At night, when he closed his eyes, he'd hear it against his ear. The same voice, the same words. He doesn't investigate anymore. Won't go near a recorder. He says silence is better because sometimes the voices don't stop when the tape does. Grief makes people see things. That's what most will tell you. A face in the clouds, a voice in a dream, a flicker of movement in an empty hallway. We want so badly to believe the people we love aren't gone. But sometimes what we see isn't imagined. At a funeral, a family decided to take a group photo. It was one of those somber, obligatory things. Everyone dressed in black, eyes red, shoulders pressed together in forced closeness. They wanted something to remember the day by, to mark the end of it all. When they developed the photo, everything looked normal at first. Relatives standing stiffly, the casket in the background draped in flowers. But then they saw it. There, between two cousins in the back row, was a face. Smiling. It was the face of the man they had just buried. Not faded, not blurry, not a trick of the light. Clear, crisp, eyes bright, lips curled upward in a grin that seemed almost too wide. He looked alive, more alive than he had in years. Some of the family gasped, swore it was a miracle, proof he was still with them. Others refused to look again, convinced that whatever was in that photo wasn't him at all. They destroyed the print, but not before whispers spread through the family. Aunts told cousins, cousins told friends. Some claimed they'd seen the same smile in their own reflection since then, lurking faintly behind them. The photographer swore the negative was clean. No tampering, no mistake. Just a face that shouldn't have been there. And maybe that's the truth about photographs. They don't just capture moments. Sometimes they capture what refuses to stay buried. Everyone talks about the witching hour. 3 in the morning. The time when the world feels thinner, when shadows stretch too long, when sleep never comes easy. For one tenant, it was the hour the knocking always began. The first night it startled him awake. 3 sharp knocks on his apartment door. He stumbled out of bed, half asleep, and opened it. No one there. Just the hallway, silent and empty. He brushed it off as a prank. Maybe some kid in the building. But the next night, the knocking came again. Same time, same rhythm. Knock, knock, knock. He waited before opening the door, convinced he'd catch whoever it was. But when he swung it open, the hall was empty again. This went on for weeks. Always at 3. Always 3 knocks. He started leaving the lights on, sleeping on the couch just to be closer to the door. And then, one night, he did something he shouldn't have. Instead of opening the door, he called out, "Who's there?" Silence. Then, slowly, the doorknob began to turn. His blood ran cold. He hadn't heard footsteps, hadn't seen shadows beneath the frame, but the knob twisted as if someone on the other side was testing it, pressing it, trying to come in. He yelled, heart racing, and the motion stopped. When he finally dared to look through the peephole, the hall was empty. The next morning, muddy footprints stretched from the outside of his door down the hallway. Small ones, bare. He moved out a week later. Never went back. And he left me with a warning. Don't ever open the door at 3, because the moment you do, you're not keeping them out. You're letting them in. Closets are supposed to be harmless. A space for clothes, boxes, forgotten junk. But when the dark behind the door starts talking back, it stops being just a closet. A teenager once told me about the whispers that haunted her room. They always started the same way, soft, low, like a radio tuned just out of range. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but the sound always came from the same place, the closet. Every night around midnight, the whispers grew clearer. Sometimes a word, sometimes just her name, stretched thin and broken. Sarah. One night, terrified but desperate for answers, she decided to whisper back. "Who are you?" she asked into the dark. The room went still. Then, in the same hushed tone, the voice replied, "Who are you?" Her throat tightened. She asked again, this time louder, and the voice answered louder too, repeating her words back in a near-perfect mimic. She slammed the closet door shut, but the voice didn't stop. Now it pressed against the wood, murmuring, laughing softly between phrases. Her parents dismissed it as stress, teenage imagination, too many horror movies. But she knew better. The last night she slept in that room, she woke to find the closet door open. Just a crack, enough for a whisper to slip through. This time, it didn't mimic her. It simply said, "I'm coming out," she screamed. Her parents rushed in, but by then the closet was silent again. Nothing inside but hanging clothes swaying slightly, as if something unseen had brushed past them. She never slept there again. The family moved within the month, and the closet? It still whispers to whoever lives in that house now. Collectors love antiques. They say the older the item, the more history it carries. But sometimes history doesn't just cling, it speaks. A man I met once prided himself on finding rare dolls. China faces, glass eyes, porcelain smiles. Most were harmless curiosities, but one, he told me, was different. He found it at a flea market sitting alone on a shelf. Its dress was yellowed, lace fraying at the edges, but the doll's face was pristine. Too pristine. The vendor didn't haggle, didn't even look him in the eye, just pressed the doll into his hands and muttered, "Take it." That night he set the doll on a shelf in his study. As he worked, he swore he heard faint sounds behind him. At first, he thought it was the house settling. Then he realized it was a voice. It said his name. He spun around, heart racing. The study was empty. The doll sat still, eyes fixed straight ahead. It happened again the next night, louder this time. A soft, childish lilt. Daniel. He tried to laugh it off, even recorded himself in the room, hoping to prove he was imagining things. On playback, he nearly dropped the device. Over the scratch of static, clear as day, the doll's voice sang his name over and over. Friends told him to get rid of it, burn it, smash it. He tried, threw it in the trash outside. But the next morning, it was back on the shelf, dressed clean, eyes bright, as if waiting for him. He doesn't collect dolls anymore. He doesn't sleep much either, because the doll hasn't stopped calling his name. And now, sometimes it adds another word. Daniel. Closer. Firefighters are trained to face chaos, smoke, heat, walls collapsing around them. But one firefighter told me the only thing that ever truly rattled him wasn't the fire itself. It was what he saw inside. The call was for a house fire on the edge of town. By the time his crew arrived, the flames had already swallowed half the structure. They broke down the front door, smoke billowing, masks on, axes ready. As they pushed through the rooms, he spotted movement upstairs. Figures, several of them silhouetted in the flames. A family huddled together at the window. He shouted for backup, rushed toward the stairs. But the moment his boot hit the first step, the figures vanished. Gone. No screams, no running, just gone. The fire roared harder, forcing him back. Minutes later, the roof collapsed. The blaze took everything. Afterward, sifting through the ash, investigators confirmed what he already feared. No one had been inside. The family who owned the house had died months before in a car accident. The place was empty. He tried to rationalize it. Smoke playing tricks, exhaustion, adrenaline. But weeks later, it happened again. He was at home, watching TV late at night, when movement outside the window caught his eye. He stood, walked to the glass, and his blood turned cold. The same figures, the same family, standing in the street, illuminated not by flames this time, but by the dim orange glow of the streetlight. Faces blank, eyes fixed on him. He blinked, and they were gone. He never told his crew, but he admitted to me, in a voice that shook, that he's seen them more than once since then, always together, always watching. And every time the air smells faintly of smoke, office buildings are supposed to feel safe, brightly lit, filled with the hum of machines, everything clean and predictable. But after hours, they become something else. Quiet, hollow, almost watchful. A group of late-shift workers told me about the elevator. It was just past midnight when they decided to leave. They pressed the button, heard the familiar chime, and watched as the doors slid open. The elevator was empty. At least, it looked empty. But when they stepped inside, one of them noticed the digital panel flicker. The little red numbers shifted, showing not just the floor count, but also the weight capacity. And the display claimed there was already someone inside, 200 pounds. They laughed nervously, convincing themselves it was a glitch. But when the doors closed, they felt it. The air pressed down, heavy, as though another body was standing among them, unseen. One woman swore she felt a brush against her arm, like fabric grazing skin. Another whispered that she heard breathing, low and steady, just over her shoulder. The elevator descended slowly, too slowly, each floor crawling past like the machine was dragging an unseen weight. By the time the doors opened, the panel had reset. 0 pounds. They stepped out quickly, hearts racing, none of them willing to speak. But the next night, when one of them stayed late alone, the elevator arrived before she pressed the button. The doors slid open to an empty car, and the display once again lit up. 200 pounds. She took the stairs, and now, whenever she passes that elevator, she swears she hears the faint sound of footsteps shifting inside, waiting for someone to ride with. Bedrooms are supposed to be safe. They're where we retreat from the world, where we close the door and tell ourselves nothing can touch us while we sleep. But sometimes, that's when something chooses to come closest. A woman once told me about the night she woke to a weight pressing down on her mattress. At first, she thought it was a dream, until she opened her eyes. There, at the edge of her bed, sat a figure. A dark outline, hunched forward, shoulders rising and falling like it was breathing. Its head was tilted, watching her. She wanted to scream, but her voice locked in her throat. She shut her eyes tight, hoping it would vanish, praying it wasn't real. When she finally forced herself to look again, the figure had moved. It wasn't at the edge anymore. It was lying beside her. She could feel the dip in the mattress, the subtle warmth of a body pressed close. The outline of a face hovered inches from hers, too close to focus on, too close to deny. Her heart pounded. She clenched her fists under the blanket, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, and then softly it exhaled. hot air against her cheek. She bolted upright, flipping on the lamp, but the bed was empty. No shape, no body. Just the sheets rumpled as though something had been there seconds before. She never forgot the sensation. The pressure of weight on the mattress, the heat against her skin, and the strangest part? When she checked the clock, it read 3:07 a.m. Exactly the same time she'd woken every night that week, though she'd never known why. Now she knows. Phones are supposed to connect us to the living, but sometimes they bridge a line we were never meant to cross. A man once told me about the call he received in the middle of the night. The ringtone jolted him awake, and when he looked at the screen, his blood ran cold. It was his grandmother's number. She'd been dead for 6 months. At first, he thought it was some cruel prank, maybe a scam. But curiosity, or maybe dread, made him answer. The line was filled with static, a low hiss like wind rushing through trees. Then, beneath it, a voice. It was faint, broken, but familiar. His grandmother's voice. She spoke his name, tenderly, the way she always had when he was a child. He whispered into the phone, asking if it was really her. The static grew louder. Her voice faltered, stammering like a record caught on a scratch. Then, suddenly, clear as a bell, she said, "I miss you." Tears burned his eyes. He wanted to believe. He almost did, but then the line clicked and the call dropped. Shaking, he checked the call log. The number wasn't hers. It wasn't even a working number at all. It traced back to the caretaker's office at the cemetery where she was buried. When he called it the next morning, no one answered. The office had no record of a call made at that time, and the landline, they said, had been disconnected for years. He doesn't answer unknown numbers anymore, and sometimes, when his phone buzzes at night, he swears he can hear her voice whispering through the static before he even picks it up. Schools are supposed to empty out at night. The chatter fades, the halls go quiet, and the rooms feel like shells of themselves. Harmless, ordinary, but silence doesn't always mean empty. A janitor told me about a night he was cleaning the classrooms after everyone had gone home. He moved from room to room, humming softly, pushing his mop across the tiled floors. When he reached one of the older classrooms, he heard it, scratching. It was faint at first, like chalk against the board. But the sound wasn't coming from the wall. It was coming from the back of the room. He flicked on the overhead lights. Rows of desks sat empty except one. The scratching was coming from there. Heart pounding, he walked closer, half expecting to find a student who'd snuck back in. But the desk was empty. Just a battered wooden surface scarred by years of names and doodles. And yet, new words were being carved into the wood, right before his eyes. Letters etched themselves into the surface, slow and deliberate, as though guided by an invisible hand. "I'm still here." The janitor stumbled back, nearly dropping his mop. The scratching stopped. The words were complete. He swore the letters were fresh, the grooves raw, the wood splintered as though cut seconds before. But when he ran his hand over them, they were smooth, aged like they'd always been there. He quit that job not long after. Said he couldn't walk past that room without feeling eyes on him from every corner, and when the school auctioned off the old desks years later, no one would say who bought that one, or if it's still writing. Families love cabins, a place to escape, tucked deep in the woods, away from the noise of everything else. But one family told me their getaway left them with questions they'll never answer. The cabin was charming. Rustic beams, stone fireplace, creaky wooden floors. Everything felt warm and inviting, except for one detail. A locked door at the end of the hallway. They tried it the first night out of curiosity. The knob rattled but wouldn't turn. No key was provided. They figured it was just a supply closet, something meant for staff. They shrugged it off until the scratching began. It was faint at first. Just after midnight, a slow drag of nails, or claws, against wood. They told themselves it was an animal, but the sound came from inside, from behind that locked door. The second night, the noise grew louder, more urgent. A steady scraping, then thuds, as if something was pushing against the barrier. The father pressed his ear to the door and swore he heard breathing. Slow, ragged. On the third night, they woke to silence. The kind of silence that makes your stomach twist. They tiptoed to the hallway, praying the noise wouldn't start again. That's when they saw it. The door stood open. No one had a key. No one had touched it. Yet the lock was broken clean, the knob hanging loose. The space beyond yawned wide and dark, swallowing their flashlight beams. The floor was coated in dust, undisturbed, except for a set of fresh footprints leading inside. Bare, human, but none leading out. They packed before dawn, never looking back. And here's the thing about cabins. Someone else is probably staying there now, which means that door isn't locked anymore. I told you at the start that one of these stories was mine. I wasn't sure I'd share it. Even now, part of me wants to stop, because saying it out loud feels like opening a door I've kept locked for years. But you've listened to 16 other stories, secrets, confessions, warnings, and it wouldn't be fair if I held mine back. It started when I was younger, curious, too bold for my own good. There was an abandoned house on the edge of town, the kind kids dared each other to approach but never enter. I went in alone. The air inside was stale, heavy, as if the house had been holding its breath for decades. Wallpaper hung in strips. The floor groaned beneath my weight. But what I remember most was the silence. It wasn't emptiness. It was attention, like the house was listening. I climbed the stairs, each step louder than it should have been. At the end of the hallway, a door waited. Closed. Ordinary. But I felt it before I touched the knob. A pull, a certainty. That room was waiting for me. I opened it. The temperature dropped instantly. My breath fogged in the air. The room was bare. No furniture, no curtains, just cracked walls and a single window coated in grime. But in the corner, faint as a whisper, came the sound of footsteps. Not mine. I spun, flashlight shaking, but the room was empty. Still, the steps circled me, slow and deliberate until they stopped just behind my back. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then came the whisper. It wasn't words I could understand, more like syllables dragged through broken teeth, low, guttural, spoken directly into my ear. I stumbled out, nearly tumbling down the stairs, slamming the front door behind me. You'd think that would be the end, but it wasn't. That night, in my own bedroom miles away, I woke to cold air pressing against my skin. My heart froze, because when I opened my eyes, I saw it. The same door, standing where my closet should have been. Closed. Waiting. I blinked, and it was gone. But sometimes, when I wake in the dark, I swear I hear the creak of a knob turning. I never check. I don't want to know what's on the other side. So now you understand why I don't go looking for ghosts anymore. Why I don't sleep well. Because some rooms don't stay where they belong. They follow you. They wait. And one day, I'm afraid mine will open. Ghost stories aren't just about shadows in hallways or whispers in the dark. They're about the weight they leave behind. The kind that settles in your chest long after the moment has passed. Think about it. Every person you've heard tonight, every laugh, every scream, every silence, they didn't just face something impossible. They carried it with them afterward. Some tried to forget. Some couldn't. Some let it shape the rest of their lives. And maybe that's the real horror. Not the ghost itself, but the way it lingers. The way it becomes part of you. I've always believed the woods, the houses, the hospitals, the roads, they all remember. They hold on to pieces of us. Fear, grief, longing, and sometimes they give those pieces back, twisted into something we can't explain. 17 stories, 17 reactions, and one confession I wish I could take back. You've heard them all now, and maybe you're thinking they're just tales, just words meant to keep you awake tonight. But when the lights go out, when the room grows still, I promise you'll remember. Because fear doesn't end when the story does. It follows you, in the silence after, in the reflection you almost don't look at, in the moment you hesitate before opening a door, and maybe that's the point. Ghosts don't just haunt places, they haunt people. They haunt us. So if you find yourself lying awake, staring into the dark, listening for a sound you're not sure you heard, don't dismiss it too quickly, Because if tonight has proven anything, it's this. Once a ghost notices you, it doesn't forget. And if you think ghost stories end when the haunting does, you're wrong.